Rayclast is a cursed land. You'd have to be mad to settle here.
Welcome back, you filthy exiles. So we had an absolutely huge announcement this morning with the 3.25 Settlers of Kalguur League announcement. And the best part about it is, overall, we finally got the much needed buffs to melee and then some, and a total rework for the Gladiator and the introduction to the Warden. And unfortunately, the Raider is now gone. Now for this list that we're going to focus on, I am focusing predominantly on melee. I was going to do a melee list irrespectively because I had a gut feeling that we would be getting melee buffs, and pretty much most of my predictions came true. It just made sense. Every league, they have a very particular way they do things. However, please keep in mind that the POBs have potentially changed a bit, and what this will mean is you will need to rework nodes on the trees because they're not currently reflected in any of the path of buildings that will be featured here. However, these path of buildings will still be a pretty good guide to go by, and in particular, the guides themselves should get you through and give you all the information you need to get through the build, level up, and whatnot. So you should be okay with everything on this list at this stage. For the builds that I am going to feature on this list, every single one of them but one has worked in the past league for 3.24, and in fact for earlier leagues, so they're pretty consistent. And in fact, every single one of the builds that's going to be on this list has received a pretty extreme buff. That also being said, I am trying to keep this list a bit safer just because while we do have the patch notes, we don't yet know the feel of the league and we need to exercise a little bit of caution on a league start scenario. So with all that being said, let's get into this list of 5 decent league starters for 3.25 league. Okay, so the first build off the ranks is going to be my Boneshatter Juggernaut. In particular, my leveling guide for the Boneshatter Juggernaut, but I'll provide all the links in the description below. This build is the definition of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And in fact, this build received some pretty decent buffs in the patch notes to both the base version of Boneshatter and the complex trauma version. Now, some of you might also be concerned about the changes to the unbreakable ascendancy on the Jug class, and my comment is it's going to be fine. If you have a look at the changes to the endurance charges, which now provide elemental damage reduction as opposed to just elemental resistances and a bit of physical damage reduction in the past, you'll find that the new configuration is most likely going to be a lot more powerful, with the new unbreakable node acting similar to the original or old 4th Vow setup. Now, this build's also going to excel if you put Divine Flesh into the build, as we have done in the past with 4th Vow for many, many leagues now, and there's no real change to that configuration for defenses at this stage as far as I can see. Now, quality multiplicative changes are going to have a huge buff on this build, in particular for scaling both damage and offense, and that should offset the nerfs for determination. And we also get 4 free sockets now because we don't have to put in totems and buff the build with Ancestral Protector or Ancestral Warlord. So we actually can play around with the gem setups and not be so starved moving forwards. So for my guide that I'm going to feature in the description below, I have full leveling breakdowns, multiple POBs, and I'll also put the progress guides. And I also did an endgame adorned two-handed stave version of the build last league with complex trauma. If you want to scale up into that heavier endgame, I should have you covered. Okay, so for the second build, it's going to be the Frostblade Trickster by Zish. Now, I like rating Zish on Twitch. He's a good creator. Make sure you check out his Twitch. His link will be in the description to his Twitch and everything else. But as far as the playstyle goes, it's a Trickster. So that means high speed, high evasion, and high damage. And as far as the late game goes, from what I've seen from Zish's videos, it has absolutely no issues. Now, as far as changes to the build for 3.25 in the patch notes, Heat Shiv is untouched and nothing else really has had anything done to it. Maybe in the late game, but that's about it. Now, as far as things like Grace, that's going to be offset by the multiplicative quality changes to gearing and the new base gear, so that's most likely not even something worth considering at this stage. Now, as far as the Frostblade skill gem itself, it's had a 265% increase in damage, which I would say is pretty good. Despite that, it has had its base cold added damage removed, but that shouldn't be a major issue with that level of increase to damage. Now, in relation to Zish's build overall and his guide, he's been running this guide for a number of leagues now, so it is quite refined and perfected at this stage and survived multiple nerfs and continues to be an absolute beast. Now, in the guide itself, and this will be linked in the description, it includes a full leveling guide And his video basically explains every bit of the build in great detail. So if you're getting stuck or anything like that, you could definitely have a look at the video. You should be able to dislodge your issues. This is definitely a melee build worth looking at post melee buffs. And yeah, as I said, check out his streams. He's a really good creator. Okay, so on this list. Okay, so build number 4 on this list is my Shield Crush Juggernaut. And in fact, this is the Shield Crush Juggernaut that I'm going to be playing this league. And I only just recently did a leveling passover with this, and it works really well even before the patch. So this build has survived for many leagues. I started playing this in 3.19. It was initially a much slower league start build. And after what I've seen today and after the patch notes, yeah, this build is going to destroy the game like a really spicy burrito might destroy your toilet. The way this build works is that you use your shield and scale up armor and ES on the shield. This enhances your flat damage per 75 armor, and per the ES on the shield, that enhances your crit. So my version is a crit stacking build. Now, according to the patch notes, this actually got 2 buffs within the skill itself. It got a flat like base damage DPS buff, and then it got an upper end DPS buff per the armor scaling. So theoretically, this should be really, really strong now. And then beyond this point, it's also one of the few builds that scales extreme levels of armor with quality on shields, and the multiplicative changes will actually push the DPS up on this build pretty significantly, most likely more so than like, you know, what it would do for like axes and things like that. But that's soon to be seen. We'll see how that scales. As far as the investment to get this to Ubers, after you put a little bit into this build can eventually hit Ubers, and I have seen people do exactly that. Obviously, you're not going to be doing that on League Start, but it's definitely an option. I generally use this build to farm like my 300 to 350 depth strategy, and I've in the past pushed it to 600 depth on Brass Dome, but this league I'll be looking to put it on a 4th Vow setup. And even with the changes to Unbreakable and whatnot, there shouldn't be any real issues. If anything, it's probably going to be even tankier than what it's been in the past. It's definitely going to hit like a truck. Now, as I was saying, the other day, I've only just recently put my guide out, and it's only about 2 days old. And yeah, pretty much everything's still as is with a few changes. I'll be servicing this build throughout the league as well, or from league start, so you'll get progress updates, you know, within the first few days and then within the first week. And my guide has also got a full act by act leveling guide with all the POBs to break down everything. It's built on mean and lean gearing, so it's not an expensive league start or anything like that. It's very easily accessible, and generally I use this to crack Crystal Kings in the first week of League really easily so I can farm All's Uprisings. Okay, so the last build that I'm going to feature on this list is one that doesn't necessarily have a very complete endgame configuration just yet, but it's got potential to be an absolutely fantastic build off of the fact that the Perforate skill gem is getting a buff from 265% added damage to 622% added damage, which is absolutely disgusting. Now, Tuadh has managed to basically run 2 red maps in a 2-stone run here on fairly scuffed gear on a 4-link, which is really good considering patch notes aren't in effect yet, which indicates to me this build has the potential to go really far. Now, it is a more risky build on this list to take on, and I wouldn't recommend it if you weren't a little more of a more experienced player. So play this one at your own volition. But I think this build could be absolutely nuts. Now, as far as progression goes, if you have a look in the description of the video, Tuadh has actually basically given a full breakdown of how they've leveled everything throughout the campaign, and any other information that you might need to get the build cracking and progressing through the game. But yeah, I'll put a link to their video in the description, and make sure you check out their channel. And I think they also stream on Twitch as well, so jump onto the Twitch and have a squiz at that too. Anyway, that's the last build that I'm going to feature on this list for now. Okay, so fingers crossed I've given you some pretty cool ideas to run with, just to sort of figure out what you might want to play in the next league. I don't ever make claim to the fact that these are the best builds or anything like that, but I generally try and look for a decent spread of builds that are interesting and a little bit different, and move away from the same standard metas. Many of these builds, or mostly for 4 of these builds, they've all been tested in the previous leagues, and they do work, with one build being a little more risky. But to be honest with you, with a 622% buff, I don't see why that shouldn't work at this stage, at least at a really basic level. Anyway, If you like this type of content, don't forget to like and sub to the channel. Don't forget to go and have a squiz at the Twitch. And I also have an X or Twitter account, whatever you call it these days. Anyway, until next time, I'll see you in the next video and have a good one.